Before we begin, a quiet agreement between you and me. What you are about to hear is not a list of inventions or a parade of dates. It is the story of how a single human gesture moved from forbidden to inevitable. It is about glass, fingers, resistance, and the slow disappearance of distance between thought and action. This story unfolds deliberately. It rewards attention. It connects engineering decisions to daily habits, forgotten laboratories to the way you hold your phone right now. So give it your time. Let it play without interruption. And listen, not just for what changed, but for why it felt so natural once it finally arrived. The 20th century ran on resistance. If you could stand in the doorway of a control room in 1960 and listen with your eyes closed, you would hear authority as percussion. A heavy breaker snapping into place, a toggle switch clicking under a gloved thumb, a rotary dial grinding through its arc and stopping with a little mechanical certainty. Even the office had its own ritualized violence. The hammering clack of typewriter keys striking paper, the carriage return yanking a line into place like a lever on a machine press. To make a system obey, you did not merely suggest. You pushed, pulled, twisted, and overcame. You negotiated with springs and contacts, with friction and detents, with materials that answered force with force. The interface was physical because the culture of computing was physical, and because the machines that mattered were the kind that could hurt you if you misunderstood them. The cockpit, the power station, the radar console, the early nuclear control panel, these were rooms built for disciplined hands. Glass was for seeing, metal was for touching. The screen was a one-way oracle. It glowed, it reported, it warned, but it did not accept contact. Touching the glass was not only pointless, it felt like a violation. The way a finger on a microscope lens feels like a trespass. Children were scolded for smearing the television. Engineers treated the curved face of an oscilloscope like a sacred surface. You looked at the screen, then you looked away to change what it showed. You read a signal, then you reached for a separate bank of knobs. You watched a blip, then you hunted for a button somewhere else. The eye and the hand lived in different neighborhoods, and the brain had to commute between them. For a long time, that separation seemed inevitable, like a law of nature. Screens were output, controls were input. But as the 1960s pushed forward, systems grew faster and denser, and the old choreography began to break. Complexity did not just increase, it multiplied. The interface, once a proud wall of dials, became a bottleneck. Nowhere was this more obvious than in air traffic control, a profession that in the jet age became less like clerical work and more like live orchestration. Radar rooms thickened with traffic. Blips crowded the green phosphor glow. Controllers built whole three-dimensional worlds in their heads while their bodies stayed anchored to a chair. Every task asked the same sequence. Look at the screen, find the right blip, then look away to press the right control, then look back to confirm. Those small glances away were not trivial. They were the moments when a situation could change. A new echo could appear, a separation could collapse, a misread could become a near miss. The machine was producing information at the speed of radio waves, but the human was still forced to translate that information through a forest of physical switches that did not rearrange themselves when the situation changed. The control room had too many buttons, and each new button was a confession that the system had outgrown its own body. In an English town that does not usually appear in myths about the future, a pragmatic engineer began to take that problem literally. At the Royal Radar establishment in Malvern, E.A. Johnson watched operators work. The Royal Radar establishment was not a place of consumer dreams. It was a place of defense seriousness, of brick buildings and damp air, of people who measured the world in signal strength and noise, not in delight. Yet Johnson saw something that would later become the central promise of modern computing. He saw that the cost was not just in time, but in cognition. The operator's mind had to map a location on the screen to a separate location on the console. It was a translation tax. When the blip was here, but the button was there, the brain had to do extra work simply to connect intention to action. Johnson wanted input and output to be co-located, to collapse the distance between seeing and doing. He wanted direct manipulation before the phrase existed. What if, instead of looking at a target and then telling the machine about it through an intermediary, you could simply touch the target? What if the glass was not only a window, but a surface of control? What if you could reach into the information and grab it? The question sounded almost impolite. The screen was sacred, and the finger was messy. But Johnson's imagination was not driven by fantasy. It was driven by physics. The human body is conductive. It carries charge. It is, in the simplest sense, a bag of salt water with a nervous system. If you could place a transparent conductive layer on the face of the display, the mere presence of a fingertip could change the electrical field. That change could be measured. Not pressure, not mechanical deformation, but capacitance. A touch that did not require force. A touch that did not require a separate tool. A touch that was instant, wireless, and always available because it used the one instrument every operator already had, the finger. In 1965, Johnson built his first capacitive touch display with the materials of the time, which meant compromise disguised as elegance. He did not have the perfected, transparent coatings that later generations would treat as a baseline. He had fine wires, arranged across a glass overlay, forming zones rather than dense grids. It was not multi-touch. It was not a canvas for gestures. It was a proof that a finger could act as a selector, that a human could indicate a point on a glowing screen and the system could respond. In his experiments, it was faster and more accurate than the alternatives of the era. The operator did not have to look away. The cognitive tax vanished. The interface began to dissolve. And in that dissolution was the seed of a different relationship with machines, one less like commanding a device and more like interacting with an environment. The world did not pivot in 1966. There was no sudden age of glass. The reason was not that the idea was weak. The reason was that the ecosystem was wrong. Most computers in that era were not interactive appliances. They were mainframes, worshipped in climate-controlled basements, fed by punch cards and batches of jobs. The dominant experience of computing was delayed gratification. Submit input, wait, receive printout. In that world, a touch display was a jet engine strapped to a bicycle. Too expensive, too specialized, too far ahead of the common use case. The CRT itself was a costly luxury in many contexts, and adding a custom capacitive overlay to it was not a path to mass adoption. Johnson's touchscreens lived where the stakes justified them, in specialized control rooms, in environments where real-time decisions mattered. They worked. They existed. And then outside those rooms, they were almost invisible. That quiet invisibility matters because it sets the tone for the touchscreen's strange history. Touch did not begin as a consumer indulgence. It began as a way to manage complexity without drowning in buttons. It began as a defense against the tyranny of physical controls. And that same tyranny was appearing elsewhere. In Geneva, under the banner of CERN, a different kind of cathedral was being built. The superproton synchrotron was not a consumer product either. It was a ring of magnets and vacuum systems designed to make the universe speak through particle collisions. Yet it had a human problem that looked eerily similar to the radar rooms of England. To control something that complex with dedicated physical controls would mean building a room with nearly 10,000 buttons. 10,000. Not as metaphor. As a number that implies operators walking along walls of panels like librarians searching shelves, or worse, making mistakes simply because the interface was too large to hold in a human memory. This was a crisis of scale. The machine had grown beyond the reach of a hand. Ben Stumpy and Frank Beck approached the problem with a kind of European practicality that nonetheless bordered on heresy. They proposed programmable controls drawn on the screen itself, virtual buttons, sliders, and panels that could change with context. One surface that could become many surfaces depending on what the operator needed. The skepticism they faced was not only technical, it was cultural. Greasy fingers, accidental activations. The idea of touching expensive instrumentation with a bare hand felt reckless. But the alternative was madness. 10,000 physical buttons would not only be costly, it would be cognitively unmanageable. So CERN built a transparent, capacitive touchscreen, a more refined cousin of Johnson's idea, and deployed it in a mission-critical environment. It worked. It reduced the control room from a sprawling hardware monument into something more compact and flexible. The button ceased to be an object and became a concept, a region of pixels plus code. That transition from hardware function to software function is one of the most important shifts in the story. Once a button can be created and destroyed by code, you can have as many as you want without adding a single gram of plastic. The interface becomes fluid in principle, even if the visuals are crude. Yet even with CERN proving the approach in the early 1970s, touch still did not become cultural. The computer itself was still not a household object. The personal computer revolution was only beginning to stir, and the machines that did reach homes were too underpowered for the kind of graphical interface that would make touch feel natural. Touch is not just a sensor. Touch implies a style of interaction that benefits from visual targets, from direct manipulation, from an environment where the screen is not merely text, but a world. In the 1970s, most screens were either rare or used for specialized tasks. Meanwhile, another branch of the family tree was forming in America, not in the polished corridors of European research, but in the pragmatic ecosystem of making things cheaper and tougher. Sam Hurst was not chasing a dream of human-centered computing. He was trying to solve a miserable problem. Graduate students spending hours reading data off strip charts. He needed to digitize coordinates. In the early 1970s, he built the Elograph, an electronic coordinate reader that was not transparent and not glamorous. It was a tablet. You placed paper on it and pressed with a stylus. The mechanism was resistive, meaning it measured position through physical pressure. Two conductive layers separated by a gap. Press down, the layers meet, the circuit completes, and you can infer coordinates. It was simple, cheap, and indifferent to what pressed it. Finger, stylus, gloved hand. If it applied pressure, it worked. That indifference would become its super. By the mid-1970s, Hurst and his company, Elographics, developed transparent resistive touch technology, and in 1977, the patents that would define the industry for decades took shape. Here, the philosophical split becomes clear. Capacitive touch senses the electrical presence of the human body. It is a kind of intimacy. The device recognizes you because you are alive, because you conduct. Resistive touch senses deformation. It recognizes force, not life. It does not care who you are or what you are. It cares that you pressed. Capacitive can be feather-light and fast, but it demands conductive contact and requires more delicate signal measurement. Resistive can be rugged and cheap, but it tends to feel like pushing into a surface rather than gliding across it. In an era when processes were weak and manufacturing priorities favored reliability, the market drifted toward resistive. Capitalism often chooses the good enough technology that can be scaled and sold, even if it is not the most elegant. A third approach existed too, infrared grids around screens that detected interruptions of light beams. The Plato terminals at the University of Illinois use such systems for computer-aided instruction. Students could touch information in a literal sense, breaking beams to select answers, entering a new kind of relationship with learning. But infrared touch had its own limitations. Bulky bezels, parallax errors, accidental activation from sleeves, or stray objects. It was a furniture solution. It scaled poorly down to pocket size. The future would not belong to thick frames of sensors. It would belong to thin layers of conductive material that could vanish into the glass. By the end of the 1970s, the groundwork was laid, but the cultural moment had not arrived. Touch existed where it was needed, in labs and control rooms and specialized terminals. The public, if asked, would still think of computers as distant machines for banks and government. The personal computer wave that rose in the late 1970s and early 1980s carried a different interface revolution with it: the mouse. Invented earlier, refined at Xerox PARC, and popularized for the masses by Apple, the mouse solved a problem touch could not yet solve: precision without fatigue. You could rest your hand on a desk and control a cursor with small movements. You could manipulate windows and icons without reaching toward the screen. In a world where screens were vertical and work sessions were long, touch threatened the body. The ergonomists gave it a name that sounded like mockery but carried real pain: gorilla arm. In 1983, Hewlett-Packard tried to sell the future anyway. The HP 150 arrived as a touchscreen desktop computer, using infrared sensors in the bezel to detect a finger. It was a product that in hindsight feels like a necessary failure. In the lab, it looked like tomorrow. In the office, it felt like punishment. Reaching forward again and again to a vertical display exhausted the shoulder. Dust settled into the bezels and confused the sensors. The device demanded the kind of cleanliness and patience that real offices did not offer. Meanwhile, the mouse was quietly conquering the desktop with a new promise: you could manipulate a graphical world without touching it. The verdict of the 1980s was brutal. Touch was not for desk work. The screen returned to being a cold surface you looked at rather than engaged. Touch was exiled. But exile does not mean death. It means migration. Touch found its home in public spaces where standing and jabbing at a screen for a short task was acceptable. The kiosk era emerged, defined by thick overlay, slow response, and the social impatience of waiting in line. ATMs, museum displays, trade show terminals, ticketing machines. Resistive touch dominated because it was cheap, robust, and tolerant of gloves and styluses. The user experience, however, taught a generation to distrust touch. You did not glide, you jabbed. The surface felt slightly soft, like pushing into a plastic membrane. Calibration drift meant you pressed one label and triggered another. The screen often looked washed out because of the extra layers and air gaps. People learned to press harder than they should have, as if force could persuade the machine to respond faster. Touch became associated with public utility, with industrial interactions, with the feeling of pleading with a stubborn system. This was touch as bureaucracy. At the same time, another domain opened where the touch was not optional: the handheld. As chips shrank and ambitions grew, companies pursued the personal digital assistant, the dream of carrying a computer in your pocket. Here the mouse had nowhere to go. The keyboard was too big, yet text entry and precision selection still mattered. The industry reached for a mediator between finger and pixel: the stylus. The stylus era was an admission that the finger was too blunt for the interfaces people were still designing. You could build tiny menus and tiny scroll bars if you assumed a fine point. The stylus preserved the old graphical metaphors of desktop computing on a smaller canvas. It allowed the industry to shrink the computer without reinventing it. But it also trapped the industry in a loop. If your interface requires a stylus, you design for a stylus. If you design for a stylus, the finger becomes unusable. If the finger is unusable, you do not need capacitive. You choose resistive because it is cheaper and because it works with plastic points. The stylus trap was not just a product choice, it was a worldview. The Apple Newton promised handwriting recognition and became a cultural punchline when it failed. The Palm Pilot succeeded by lowering its ambitions and training users to write in a simplified alphabet. People complied because the device delivered value. The Palm defined late 1990s touch: tap to open, tap tiny arrows to scroll one line at a time, hold the device in one hand, and poke with the other. Two-handed computing. Efficient, practical, emotionally dry. It felt like operating a small administrative machine rather than touching a living surface. Even when the devices were loved, the interface was still rooted in a mindset where the screen was a slate and the stylus was the proper tool. Then in 1994, an object arrived that should have rewritten everything. IBM Simon, released to the public as a personal communicator, was a phone that was also a computer. It had a touch screen and applications, fax and email, calendar, and sketchpad. In retrospect, it is startling how much of the modern smartphone it anticipated. Yet it died quickly. The battery technology was inadequate. The networks were not ready for constant data. The processor and display could not deliver delight. The resistive overlay dulled the screen. The interface lagged. The device felt like a brick from the future delivered into an era that could not feed it. Simon was not a failure of imagination. It was a failure of timing, of infrastructure, and of the kind of smooth responsiveness that humans need before a new interface stops feeling like work. For most of the world, touch remained either public and annoying or private and stylus bound. This is the period that makes the later transformation so violent. People had years of muscle memory that said, screens do not really like your finger. They tolerate it. They accept it if you press hard enough. They do not invite it. So when touch finally became fluid, it did not feel like an incremental improvement. It felt like the screen waking up. That awakening began in a place that, ironically, was not focused on delight either. At the University of Delaware, Wayne Westerman was dealing with pain, tendinitis, repetitive strain injury, the modern cost of keyboard and mouse work. He needed a zero-force interface. With John Elias, he built multi-touch sensors in a language of gestures, not just pointing at a coordinate, but using the hand as a chord instrument. 2 fingers sliding to scroll, a pinch to zoom, rotation. complex commands mapped to natural motions. This required not just sensor hardware, but processing and algorithms capable of tracking multiple touch points, distinguishing intentional contact from resting contact, turning raw coordinates into meaningful action. FingerWorks products were niche and not beautiful. Matte slabs for people who needed relief, but the core invention was gold. It redefined touch from selection to manipulation. Instead of touching a button, you touched the content. Instead of commanding a list to move through a scroll bar, you pushed the list itself. Touch became not a click, but a physical metaphor. In the early 2000s, the mobile world was dominated by the BlackBerry, a fortress built from tactile certainty. The click of tiny keys became the sound of global business. The industry believed with near religious conviction that you could not type on glass. You needed the edges of keys under your thumbs. You needed tactile feedback. The touchscreen phones that existed only reinforced this belief because they were built on resistive technology and stylus-centric interfaces. They were the worst version of touch. Press hard, wait for redraw, miss targets, try again. If you had watched those devices struggle, you would have been confident that a large glass phone was a joke. Inside Apple, secrecy turned that joke into an obsession. The story that matters is not only the hardware, but the choice of what kind of illusion Apple would prioritize. In the development that became Project Purple, designers and engineers chased a single feeling: immediacy. Not the raw speed of a benchmark, but the visceral sense that the pixels were attached to your skin. One of the most important moments came in a software demo of scrolling. A list moved under a finger, yes, but it also carried inertia. Flick it, and it continued. Hit the end, and it stretched and snapped back. The rubber band effect was not functional necessity. It was psychological engineering. It told the brain that digital objects obeyed physical laws. It made the glass feel like a surface with friction and mass. In the world of human perception, that lie was more important than any spec sheet. Lie resistive would not do. Resistive touch is pressure. Pressure creates friction. Friction makes flicking feel sticky. Resistive also struggled with multi-touch in the way the new gesture vocabulary demanded. Apple needed projected capacitive touch, a dense grid of transparent conductive material that could sense the disturbance of an electrostatic field caused by a finger. This demanded new filtering algorithms to defeat noise from radios and displays. It demanded manufacturing capabilities to bond layers without dulling the image. And it demanded a critical material decision that would shape the cultural aesthetics of technology for years. Glass, plastic scratches. A device meant to live in pockets with keys needed a surface that could survive contact with the real world. The screen was no longer a delicate window. It was the front face of the object. The entire identity of the device would be that it was mostly screen. Then came a philosophical line in the sand that would force everything else to change. No stylus. If you see a stylus, they blew it. This was not just a quip. It was a design constraint so severe it became a weapon. Without a stylus, targets had to be finger-sized. Interfaces had to be redesigned. The keyboard had to become predictive, forgiving, intelligent. The system had to infer intent because the finger is imprecise. This is where the iPhone's real disruption lived. Not only in sensing touch, but in interpreting it. The old world demanded precision from users. The new world demanded intelligence from the system. When the device finally appeared publicly in January 2007, the most important moment was not the claim that it was a phone or an internet communicator. It was a gesture that proved the screen was continuous. Slide to unlock. Not a code sequence on buttons, but a physical metaphor on glass. Put your finger down, drag, watch the object track your motion, release into a new state. The audience reacted because the gesture felt like a latch on a gate. It was intuitive, but more than that, it was smooth. It did not stutter. It did not redraw like a tired computer. It behaved like a living surface. The iPhone made touch feel soft and fluid. And once you experience that softness, the old jabbing mode feels broken. It is not that the old devices became worse overnight. It is that the human expectation leapt forward. The physics of illusion became an industry mandate. Low latency became a moral requirement. Direct manipulation became the default. Visual feedback and intelligent correction replaced tactile keys. The industry's denial was loud and confident. It has no keyboard, they said. It will fail at email. It is too expensive. It is a toy. But the toy was the point. New paradigms often arrive through delight because delight trains behavior faster than an instruction manual. And because the new touch interface invited play, it also invited learning. People discovered what a flick meant. They learned that objects could be pushed. They learned that zooming was a pinch, not a menu. They learned that the screen could become anything. That last point, the screen as shapeshifter, was the deeper revolution. A hardware button is a commitment. It exists for one purpose. A touch screen is an argument that purpose should be defined by software. With the App Store, the phone could become a piano, a steering wheel, a medical scanner, a level, a map, a camera viewfinder. The Surface surrendered its identity to code. This is how the touchscreen did not merely replace buttons, but replaced product categories. It made the device an infinite canvas of functions. Feature phones with dedicated music keys suddenly looked like fossils. Even competitors who initially dismissed the idea had to pivot. Android, originally aiming at a BlackBerry-like design, shifted toward the glass rectangle because the expectation had been set. Once the standard of touch was established, the market began to punish anything that did not meet it. This was also a brutal extinction event for resistive technology in consumer devices. Resistive did not vanish from the world because it still had advantages in gloves and industrial environments, but in the realm of objects we loved and carried, capacitive won. People began to poke old resistive screens lightly and assume they were broken. The very gesture of touch changed. A press became a tap. A jab became a glide. Touch became less like a demand and more like a conversation. And with that conversation came consequences that were not immediately obvious. When the screen is the interface and the interface is frictionless, the barrier between intention and execution collapses. That collapse is intoxicating. It is also dangerous. The touchscreen did not just change how we control machines, it changed how machines capture us. Turn a modern phone off and it becomes a black mirror reflecting your face back at you. Turn it on and it becomes an endless environment designed to respond instantly. The smoothness that makes touch feel humane also makes it hard to stop. Without resistance, you can slide deeper without noticing. The gesture becomes a habit. The habit becomes a posture. The posture becomes anatomy. Look at the device under light and you see the fingerprint of humanity. Smudges are not only oil, they are evidence of contact repeated thousands of times per day. Studies have suggested average users touch their phones in the thousands daily, and heavy users far more. Even if the exact number shifts across research, the lived truth is obvious. The hand returns to the screen constantly, like a nervous tick or a ritual. To support this, chemists developed oleophobic coatings that repel oil, but the finger wears them down. Over time, the glide becomes stickier, and users unconsciously wipe their glass against jeans or shirts, preening the portal to keep it clear. We have invented a new grooming behavior to maintain access to our digital world. The body adapts. Heads tilt forward, shoulders round. The neck carries loads it was not designed for as people bend to look at a small, glowing rectangle. The term text neck is not poetic. It describes a real shift in strain. The thumb becomes the primary actor. For millions of years, the thumb was for gripping, while the index finger pointed. Now the thumb scrolls and types and swipes, a repetitive motion performed in quiet, in public everywhere. Tendons inflame. New injuries appear. The interface rewires the body as surely as it rewires the brain. The deeper shift, though, is cultural expectation. The generation that grows up on touch does not experience interactivity as special. It experiences it as a default property of surfaces. A toddler who pinches and zooms on a tablet will try to pinch a magazine page and feel betrayed when nothing happens. That moment is often played for humor, but it is a profound indicator. The child is not confused by technology. The child is confused by reality's refusal to behave like software. The touchscreen has not just taught gestures, it has taught a metaphysics. The idea that information is something you can grab and reshape with your hands. When a surface does not respond, it feels dead. This expectation pushed touch beyond phones into everything else. Cars, refrigerators, kiosks, thermostats, elevators. The logic was seductive for manufacturers. One slab of glass is cheaper than dozens of physical controls. Software updates can add buttons without retooling plastic molds. A company can ship a new interface without changing hardware. In the 2010s, the dashboard became a screen, and the screen became a battleground between design ideology and human factors. Touch is wonderful for dynamic information and maps. It is terrible for blind control. Physical buttons have geography. You can find a knob without looking because your fingers remember where it is and your skin can feel its shape. Touchscreens erase that geography. To change volume or climate on a flat surface, you often must look away from the road. The cost of that glance is measured in distance traveled blindly. The pendulum began to swing back as drivers voiced frustration and safety researchers raised alarms. Some manufacturers restored physical controls for critical functions. This was an admission, quiet but important, that touch is not universally superior. It is one interface among others, and the old truth about resistance still matters. Sometimes the click is not nostalgia, it is safety. Yet the click does not disappear. It returns as simulation. Glass is numb, so engineers build haptics to put a phantom nervous system into the device. Early vibration motors buzzed crudely, shaking the whole phone like a cheap pager. Later, systems used precise actuators to produce a sharp tap that it felt like a button press even when nothing physically moved. A home button could become a solid surface and still feel clickable when powered on. The brain, hungry for confirmation, accepts the illusion. We are watching the interface circle back on itself, trying to bring the tactile certainty of Bakelite and springs into a world of flat glass. Some experiments go further. aiming to change the friction of glass with electrostatic effects, or to create temporary physical bumps through microfluidics and flexible layers. The goal is consistent. Keep the infinite canvas, but restore the reassurance of touch that answers back. And beyond the glass rectangle, another question is emerging, one that echoes Johnson's original heresy in a new form. If the screen was once a window and became a surface, why must it be a surface at all? If cameras can see our hands and sensors can track our gestures in space, the world itself can become the interface. Pinch the air, grab a virtual object, swipe a menu that floats in front of you. This is the promise of spatial computing, a new attempt to dissolve the device into the environment. But even in those visions, the language is still the language of fingers. The gesture vocabulary born from multi-touch remains, translated from glass to air. We may eventually move past screens, but we may not move past the basic idea that the body should manipulate information directly, that the distance between intention and action should be small enough to feel like touching thought itself. That is the strange arc of the touchscreen. It began as an answer to too many buttons in places where mistakes could be catastrophic. It endured decades as a clunky public utility, teaching people that touch meant jabbing at slow plastic. It got trapped behind styluses that preserved the old computer metaphors on tiny displays. It was revived by a fusion of capacitive sensing and gesture language, then revealed to the public as a fluid illusion so convincing it changed what humans demanded from every device. The touchscreen did not merely replace the keyboard for some tasks. It changed what a computer is allowed to be. It made software feel like a physical substance, something that can be pushed and stretched. It made glass intimate. It turned the window into a door, and then it made the door so seamless we stopped noticing the frame. Now, if you hold your phone and feel your thumb begin its automatic scroll, you are feeling the end state of that history. A human nervous system in constant contact with a digital nervous system, separated by a thin membrane of glass that has been engineered to disappear. The screen senses you not because you press it with force, but because you are conductive, because you are alive. It answers instantly not because it must, but because the illusion of instant response is the core product. And in that instant response is the most important consequence of all. Resistance has been removed from the interface, and when resistance disappears, behavior accelerates. We became faster, more connected, more capable. We also became more reachable, more distracted, more bent over the black mirror, wiping our fingerprints away so the world behind the glass stays clear. If you have ever caught yourself in the reflection of a dark screen, face lit by ambient light, thumb hovering in anticipation, you have seen the symbol of the modern age. A species that once commanded machines through levers now touches its reality through a smooth surface, believing in the physics of pixels because the pixels move like matter. The screen used to be cold glass. Now it is the place where intention lands, where work and play and social life and identity all converge under a fingertip. And the next time you slide to unlock or flick a list and watch it coast, you are repeating a gesture whose lineage runs back through a Danish engineer trying to avoid 10,000 buttons, an American inventor measuring coordinates with pressure, and a British radar lab where someone quietly decided the easiest way to control a system might be the simplest human motion of all. If you want more stories like this, the hidden histories where everyday gestures are built from decades of stubborn engineering and cultural compromise, follow this channel, subscribe, and keep listening. Because the interfaces that feel natural are never natural. They are negotiated, invented, and fought over. And the next time a new interface arrives and makes the old one feel suddenly outdated, the real story will not be the product on stage. The real story will be the long, invisible chain of people who tried to make machines feel a little more human, one touch at a time. If this story helped you see the world a little differently, if it made an ordinary gesture feel newly strange or newly meaningful, that is the point. These documentaries exist to slow down what we usually rush past and to uncover the invisible history hiding inside everyday technology. If you want more long-form stories like this about the systems that quietly shape our lives, subscribe, follow, and stay with the channel. And if you know someone who spends their days touching glass without ever thinking about how it came to feel alive, share this with them. The next story is already waiting.